All right, g'day everyone. Welcome to Classic Coaches and our masterclass series. My name's Greg Mumm. I'm the head of the Positive Rugby Foundation, and today we've got a great guest, Scotty Wisemantel. We're going to start by mixing it up a little bit. So, Scotty, over to you, mate, to start.
Okay, thanks, Mummy. Just going to start with a video. So, always start with a primer. Start with a primer with the session. This is your primer. That's a little primer probably to start before we get into skill acquisition. So Mummy's asked me to talk briefly about my background. My background is I had 5 years at Parramatta Rugby League. I then played at Eastwood for about 7, stumbled into coaching, and through that journey have coached teams at the provincial level like the Waratahs as an assistant coach, and internationally as an assistant coach with teams like Samoa, Japan, and most recently England. So that's it in a nutshell. So let's move on to the presentation. So the way that I'd like to present this is it's around skill acquisition. And why use that primer at the start? Because most of your players, whether they're professional or it's an under 8s, you have to remember that before they get to that session, they've been doing something else. So your first activity has to be engaging. It has to be fun. And we always have a theory in that it's about starting fast. And for that reason, it's a variety of games. Makes it fun, makes it engaging, makes training something that they look forward to doing. So that's a starting point. Then I'll now move into the skill acquisition. So how do you put your skills and drills? How do you implement them into your session? So for instance, we'll go from the theory to the field, because there's a lot of theory out there, but I like to actually use the practical. So the first thing is Damien Farrow, a great skill acquisition expert in Australia. He always says that you presume 2 things when you're dealing with skill acquisition. So firstly, that your players are motivated to learn and improve. And once again, I think it's the formatting of your training session. So if it's mundane and it is custodial coaching, so in other words, coaching the way that you were coached, which was 2 laps around the oval, couple of stretches, and then you move into a very, very closed skill drill, that becomes mundane after a while. So you need to motivate the players, and in turn, you'll get that love back. All of a sudden, they get excited and they want to try things. And then the other thing is that that suggestions or whatever we do, it's implemented in a systematic fashion over seasons. So it's not just, oh, we'll pick this one today and pick this one tomorrow. Look, there's nothing wrong with changing, but however, it's got to be systematic. So you come back and there's a loop in your skill acquisition, and that's the design of your sessions. I then move on to having a philosophy. So I think as a coach, you must have a philosophy, what you stand for. If you don't, you stand for nothing really. bits of everything and a lot of nothing. So have a philosophy with your coaching. My personal philosophy, I'm very game-based. I'll go game-based and then I'll come back to small drilling, game-based drilling. And then with the drilling, always change the drill. So it's the same skill, but it's not the same drill. So you have to be well planned to do that. So you have to plan the work and then work the plan. It's just a simple saying that we have. So then we move on to then how do we teach it? The best form of learning, and it's actually shown by people far smarter than I, that university studies show that implicit learning, so in other words, where people work it out themselves, is far greater than explicit learning. So being told. As an example, tying a fishing hook, something as simple as that. You show the person how to do it, and then you show them again and show them again, and then say, go away, now you go tie the knot. As opposed to explicitly going, this, bang, once, get them, and then go, no, you've done it wrong. This, once, go. There's a big difference. So implicit, show them, let them go away, problem solve, work it out themselves. And where does it fit into the program? There is a need for explicit learning. So if you're coaching an under 10s and they haven't experienced the breakdown, you've got a bunch of players that haven't experienced the breakdown before. You actually have to show them this is a breakdown. This is what happens in the breakdown. These are the laws of the breakdown. So it's quite explicit. However, as your training sessions go on, they become more implicit. So I think wherever you can, get that implicit learning. And then if there's a tipping point where there's a lot of failure, and when I say a lot of failure, over 50% success failure, I think that's where you go back. You go back to the explicit, give them the confidence, show them again, and then don't be afraid to go back to implicit again. Failure is good, and we'll get to that at the back end of the presentation. Then from there, I look at the coaching. So now we get to the coaches. They're so important. I like I said before, I stumbled into coaching. It wasn't something that I really desired. I had a teaching background. I'd studied whilst I was playing, and it just so happened. But the coaching side of things, it's a really important thing, because if you coach well, you can change. It sounds quite dramatic, but you can change players' lives, the way they look at things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they go on to play for Australia or a World 15 or even Super Rugby. It might mean that they have a moment where they go, you know what, I get that. I really enjoyed that session. I love that season. I love that coach. And then they're the sort of people that become your club stalwarts. And then some of them aren't very good at all. So they become your committee members. They become your supporters. They become successful in their business, and they become your sponsors because they have an affinity with the game. So coaching, the responsibility around your coaching is so important. So when we're kids, so we learn implicitly. So I'm going back to the implicit. So the old rules of 6 and out, one-handed off the roof if you're playing cricket. And the advent of coaching has changed all this, because we try and put everything in a box. So sometimes go back to that and go, how can I be creative with my coaching so to get a result? So for instance, if you're trying to design space, it could be that you start with, say, 8 on 8, and I'm thinking, you've got, say, 16 kids at training. If you don't, let's go worst case scenario, you've got 12 kids at training. So you go 6 on 6, and you've got a certain space, and you might confine it to start with. It might be 30 metres width. And after every touch, one of the defenders has to drop out. The guy who makes the touch has to drop out. So if that's the case, you then create a game of how quickly can you score, because you're going to have an overlap. Really simple game. Kids will work it out. So that's what we're going back to. So the old rules that you used to make up in the backyard with cricket and footy, you can do that with your coaching. You can be creative, and inadvertently, implicitly, kids are working out there has to be space on this field somewhere. And then how do we get to that space? All right. So we're dealing with a MyPod generation. So what does that mean? It means traditionally they've grown up now with 7 minutes ad break. So talking about concentration, there's a fantastic book out there called Deep Work. I'm not sure of the author's name, but it's a really good book. Talks about, I suppose, I'm 50 odd, the generation, my generation and the generation above me, our knowledge in general was nowhere near the knowledge of a 13, 14, 15-year-old now, our broad knowledge. However, our domain strength of what you're good at, what you're specialised in, is really deep. It's a lot deeper than now because there's a lot of information now and it's spread thin. So, with your coaching, you need your domain strength. You need to build that knowledge and get really, really strong in it. And then, it might not be the whole picture of coaching. It might be just an area. It might be skill acquisition. And you become really good at that and designing it and implementing it. Just understanding that 7 minutes ad break. So, changing the drill, not the skill. So, you might have a catch pass drill and all of a sudden there's too much success. They can do it easily. You change the drill, but not the skill. So, sorry, there's a car just gone past. I'm at a cafe that's now closed down to get the internet. The joys of living in regional Australia. So you change the drill, not the skill. So all of a sudden you go to another catch pass skill and it looks different. And then all of a sudden there's a stimulus again. I've mentioned linear versus non-linear there. So you might go, linear would be catch pass to catch pass to catch pass to catch pass. So you might go 4 different drills. But to really test the catch pass, you follow the sequence of the game. The game, I believe, is the greatest teacher. So the way you do that is you might go catch pass, too easy, catch pass, a little bit of failure to then a breakdown or a defensive drill, and then you come back to it. So it's not linear. There is the bounce effect to see if there is learning. So you have to test for learning as you go. So, and then the studies are behind it. You've got 9.45 minutes on task before giving up. That's the Western way, as opposed to Japanese. It's 40% longer. So just with the kids, and I suppose culturally of where we're coming from. So I think that's really important when you're looking at your sessions. So the next part is winning the workout. So I've put Owen Farrell and George Ford there because they're 2 guys that I found 2 of the most competitive blokes that I've ever worked with, insofar as wanting to be outstanding at everything. So to do that, they have to be meaningful sessions and a desired outcome. So for instance, the best way to describe it is, let's go back to the breakdown because it's a murky area, and I'm thinking more so for the coaches at the junior levels where they haven't experienced it before, and putting your head in dark places. So the desired outcomes, there has to be some failure there. But it's actually creating a challenge point, and we'll get to that in a tick, where there's, say, 30, 40% failure, and then you can build on that success. As the success rate, as it rises, and they become more comfortable with it, you make the drills or you make the games more challenging. So there's that challenge point there. So it's really important that failure is not a bad thing. And if I look at the schooling system now, and this is a generalization, but the schooling system, everyone's a winner. Anyone can be anything. Well, no, they can't. Not everyone's going to run in the 100 metres in the Olympic final because genetically you're not predisposed to it. So you can't do anything. So I think we need to say that failure is okay as long as we learn. And then from that failure, you can actually work out ways that the individual, that you can overcome things, and you create your own technique, or so you've got the individual or collective as a team. So,
Wisey, can I just ask one question there?
yes, mate.
I think it's a really important point that you're making, and I think what you're saying, not only for the players to fail, but also for a coach. I think a lot of coaches think that if their session runs smoothly and there's no errors, that they've actually created a good session.
Yep.
Whereas what you're saying is, we as coaches, we should really be creating a session where we're getting a 30 to 50% failure rate. Otherwise, we're not challenging our players enough. Is that right?
That's 100%. And look, I'll give you a real life example. So during the World Cup, pre the Australian game, obviously Eddie Jones, head coach. I'm Australian, proudly Australian. So there's a fair bit of anxiety there from the coaches. And once again, your anxiety should never, ever be transferred to the players. So your role as a coach is clarity, consistency, and confidence. So how you do that, whether you drive it through hard messages, softer, more subtle, more interactive, doesn't matter. That's your style. But I remember there was a session that we had, and it looked horrible, and it was all around the kick battles, and we probably had 40 to 50% failure. And afterwards we were reviewing the session, and I just said, "Oh, that's horrible. Like we need to change this, we need to change that." And I remember Eddie saying, "No. The challenge point." Like we went back, looked at the GPS numbers, and because we were tracking at over speed, it was ridiculous how fast this was and how physical the game was that we were playing. He said, no, we've reached the challenge point. That's fantastic. And then all of a sudden, when we did peel it back at the next session to game speed, the failure rate was very, very low. It was probably 15%. But it's okay to fail. And that's where I got anxious, because I thought the failure rate is too great, and obviously the context of the game and where you were. And once again, from a coaching point of view, if you have assistant coaches, it's really good to lean on each other and go, "Look, I'm anxious about this. It didn't feel right," and then you can have that conversation. So it's okay to fail. All right, we're right to continue.
Yeah, mate, that's awesome. I just thought that was a huge distinction, because it's a flip of the mindset for a lot of coaches. So thanks for clarifying.
No, it's good. So look, blocked versus random. So blocked is your traditional, you keep everything in a control box, and as opposed to the random, where there's multiple options, there's decision making. As much as you can go towards the random, because the game is random. Like I said, I can't emphasize it enough. The game is the teacher. So when you design things, start with the game, not with what you think might look good. So pressure situations, unstructured games. So I've given you an example, and look, if you're an under-8s coach, this doesn't matter at above game speed, so 120 metres per minute. But the thing that does matter to everyone is the rules to emphasise themes. So, you might have a goal kicker who fails under pressure. So when you're playing the games, if there's a penalty, you get them to take a pressure kick. You might emphasise, I'll go back to the breakdown, because it's one of those murky areas where some coaches don't like coaching it, that your policy might be ball carrier +2. And if those two are too slow, once the tackler makes the contact, and it doesn't have to be full contact, he falls to the ground, but the next arriving player, if those two aren't in by the next arriving player, it's a turnover. And then away you go. That's how you create layers on your games. Once again, learning the skill, not the drill. So we can all become sort of geniuses at a drill. Blokes my age can actually do a catch pass drill in a closed situation, block situation, looks good. As soon as you throw it random, it's catastrophic. There's no way we can do it. There's no way you can keep up. So that's the difference. The last thing here on the block versus random, skill and context. So I think we find, particularly with individual skills, we look at things, and I'll take a line-out throw, for example. When you warm up for a line-out throw, it's traditionally you throw to 2 ball, then you throw to 4, then you throw to 6. So why not flip it on its head? You start the session and you get the 2 line-out throwers, throw as long as you can, you get 5 throws, and the winner and it has to land within half a metre of a line. So it's got to be straight down a line. and the winner is the longest throw. So start long, work back. Then you add another layer and you go, right, once we go into our line-out technique, you go into next action, which is, sorry, the internet's becoming unstable. We're good again. Okay, you throw the ball, but then you receive the ball off the top and you pass as a hooker. And then what you might do is get the line out to then move for 2 phases before you go to another line out. So now you're getting the throwing, the lifting, the jumping actions to next action. Because I find that what we do is we put the skill in an isolated block, but it's never in the context of the game, which is the next action. So, and that happens at all levels. So now that you're conscious of it, look for it, particularly line out throwing. That's probably the best one to look for. So then it looks at the next one, which is practice versus training. And the easiest way to do this is to look at rehearsal versus learning. So practice to me is rehearsal. Training is learning. So in my training sessions, I always have a section where there's an expression session. So in other words, there's no consequence. However, there's 2 types of errors. There's careless, which careless errors are if you don't know the knowledge, so where you're supposed to be on the field, or you don't get off the ground quick enough. So they're effort areas. So there's careless and there's constructive errors. So the constructive ones are, it's a 2-on-1, the defender's jamming and you've tried to flick it on as fast as you can. Brilliant, brilliant. You're actually trying to improve. So I think you break your training up into practice versus training. Practice is rehearsal. So that's trying to nut it down so you get, I suppose, get a patterning, a consistency. Everyone knows what they're doing on the same page. It's rehearsal. Training is where it can be ugly and there's that failure. That's training, okay? And that is learning. So there's a big difference, all right? So developing perfect technique versus consistent outcomes. So I'll give you 2 examples here, really good examples. So Alexander Popov, a great swimmer, obviously not born in Australia, but swam for Australia. Was at the Australian Institute of Sport, and I've just got a cleaning truck going past. Beautiful. Was at the Australian Institute of Sport, had the most perfect stroke. I think he swam 50 and 100. What the Institute of Sport, what the coaches then did was instruct every other swimmer to swim like Popov. Now, there was only one Popov. And there was a whole generation of lost swimmers there. Give you an example, one off the top of my head, Rob Abernethy, who missed out on the Com Games and missed out on the Olympics by a bee's diddly, so 0.001 of a second. So he misses out. He then takes a scholarship at Arizona State under the tutelage of a guy called Rick DeMont. Rick puts him in the pool, says, swim, go, show me 100 metres. He swims 100 metres. He goes, what are you doing? He said, have a look at you. You're a big guy. You got a big ass. You got big legs, big shoulders. I want you to rip the water. I don't want you to glide. I want you to rip the water. And that was his technique. So I think developing perfect technique versus consistent outcomes. The other one is Buddy Franklin, a guy from the AIS, a very, very good biomechanist. Dave Ruff went down and did some work with Buddy before he was at Sydney. They developed a biomechanically perfect kick. The problem was his kick numbers, his accuracy numbers went down. So in the end, they said, just go back to how you kick. And then all of a sudden his kick percentages went up again, because it's like saying someone like Matthew Burke, who went out of hand, so punt kicking, used to kick low, versus someone like Chris Latham, who kicked the ball very, very high. It's the same outcome. And I think with your skill, it's about developing what are the consistent things that you need to coach. So for instance, for a catch pass, I would say that the only things you need are an early catch. So in other words, keep your elbows bent, but an early catch, get it early, get it on the inside of your midline, catch it early, and then hands to the target. That's it. So for instance, once again, Stephen Larkin would swing the ball low, as opposed to, say, a Dan Carter, who would catch it straight across his body. both had the same outcomes. The end points were the same. So the start point and the end point were the same. Everything in the middle, different. So for a kicker, it might just be something like your ball drop. So a consistent ball drop, hitting the ball hard with your foot, like a hard foot. And that can be it. Can be the cue. So I think we overcomplicate sometimes looking for perfect technique as opposed to consistent outcomes. All right, sorry, I just sort of faded there.
No, I just say, mate, that from a player's point of view, you know, I think that must be a massive relief when a coach just tells them 1 or 2 coaching cues rather than 10, because then they can get on playing the game rather than worrying about, have I caught it early? Is my hand up? Are my fingers up? What part of the body is the ball passing? You know, there's so much to think about. Quite often you hear athletes, you know, worry about, I'm just thinking. And then at the same time, we're playing them to play instinctively. It seems to clash.
No, so that's spot on, Mummy. So, look, the thing is, clarity breeds confidence. And look, mate, in my early coaching career, or the coaching journey, I don't like to say career because I feel like it's I'm never really going to work. In the early part of my coaching journey, I was definitely guilty of it, you know, because you had all these things and then you go, who am I trying to satisfy here? I'm making myself feel smart as opposed to decluttering the player and actually just giving him simple cues and let's get on with it and find out the best way to do it. If I go back to the breakdown, once again, there's so many different techniques, and the technique that might work for Michael Hooper, it probably doesn't work for a Tom Banks because they're different body types, they're different positions, and they're doing the breakdown at different parts of the field. So they've got to work out, you've got to come out with a way that they can execute the skill. Now, having said that, you might have basic principles. So you have wide breakdown, we're going to do this. It's then the how that as a coach you can implement, and that's from your skilling, your drilling, and then finding out getting feedback from us. How does that feel? I think it's important. Big Pep. This is going back to 2007 with Pep. So with, and I've spelled his name wrong. People unwittingly set up practice for success rather than setting up practice for learning. And this is, so if I go to the bottom of the screen here, and that is a quote that I hear from a lot of coaches. Okay, they really improved that skill during the session, or geez, they were sharp that session. And then you look back at the session, you go, there was no challenge point. There was no challenge point at all. They were just, all they were performing poodles. So you want permanent behavior, not transient behavior. Because if you do that drilling, you'll find that it's transient. They'll learn that drill. And then all of a sudden, like I'm looking at the moment, I'm looking back out over the beach. They'll go and have a surf in this environment, in this region. They'll come back and then they go, so what was the drill again? So it's transient. They're learning. It's not permanent. And once again, I keep going back to learning the skill as opposed to learning the drill. So you have to set the practice up. And that's the I suppose, the art of coaching is setting your practice up for that learning. Ways you can do it. So how you do it, you can manipulate the rules, you manipulate time, you manipulate parts of the field or the size of the field, and then numbers. So the example I gave you before with less numbers with each phase creates space for the attack. Once again, rules, you could say that unless your 2 arriving players aren't there before the second arriving defender, then it's a turnover, too slow at the breakdown. Time, you can have a task that's extremely difficult and they've got to go for, say, 90 seconds, which is roughly the highest ball in play that they might have in a junior level. So you work out the time, the ball in play. The other thing is you can pre-fatigue players. So in other words, you have some very, very hard tasks and then you go back to a game that looks at the tactical side of things. So we use that a lot with England with our kicking game. We pre-fatigue them and then go and see how accurate their kicking game was under fatigue, which then looks at the attentional focus and then the worst case scenario. So worst case scenario is you can only win the ball at 2 ball on a line out. You've got a scrum going backwards and you can only take free kicks. You got a scrum going backwards, and you can't win a line out, which means now you have to tap and go every time you get a penalty. And you can, but you don't explicitly say those things. All you would do is go, you've got a line out where you can't win the ball, and you've got a scrum going backwards. Okay, away we go. And then you start the game. The other thing is the environment. It's. I think when there's windy days, I think you need to stipulate to players, this is a great opportunity to see how our skills hold up under trying conditions. Ground conditions, wet balls. I really enjoy just having a bucket there with soapy water every now and then. So once their catch pass becomes really slick, you then wet the balls and it's soapy balls. So then see how they go. So once again, we're layering it and it becomes harder again. And then the final piece is the ball size. So you have smaller balls. You have NFL balls. They're brown. They're hard to see. It makes it difficult. So you try and challenge them at every point. So once again, I come back to the challenge point, and that's Farrow's work. So talent. Well, look, you'll see kids who have all got ability, but talent. The talent side of things is the definition, and I really like it from Martin Raftery, was ability plus attitude plus commitment, because I think we often see that talented kid who's got a lot of ability, but they probably don't have the attitude where they really want to do it, or the attitude of, you know what, I'm good at other sports, so, I'll just dip a toe in, and then the commitment to follow through. So that's talent. And then when we talk about talent, I think we often overlook that guy, that real hard worker type guy who ends up going on and might play for Australia, and they go, oh yeah, but he didn't have much talent as a kid. Well, when you look back at it on that, he probably did. He had limited ability, but he had a great attitude and he was committed to the cause. I think of Dan Palmer, ex-New South Wales Brumbies prop, who ended up playing for Australia. That he to me, he maximised his talent. So then, who picks the talent? So performance versus potential, and then the calendar effect. So once again, a spelling error. So if you look at the calendar effect, and this is probably for the younger coaches, the coaches who are dealing with younger ages, and I'm flicking through this calendar effect because you'll find that you start to pick, and I've got that photograph there because those kids are the same age, and you've got to be very careful. You look at, if I go back to the ability, all right, or the talent, the definition, you've got to be careful of the calendar effect because you're picking from the first 3 months of the year. And then with those kids, they tend to go through the systems because they get the cumulative advantage through more training because they get picked in those rep teams. They get better coaching, which hopefully your rep coaches are, more games because they get the rep games as well as their extra season, and exposure to advanced movement. So I think it's one of those ones. It doesn't mean that kids born in the second, third, or fourth quarters of the year that they don't come through. It's usually those guys, they come through when they catch up at the back end. So you just got to be very careful of going, am I picking on calendar effect, or am I actually picking on their talent and what they can and can't do? A good example, Chris Whittaker. Didn't make any rep teams, and then all of a sudden starts to come through at Randwick and then goes on to play for Australia. Once again, good to great. This is probably for the senior coaches, but if you've got a young team, say an under-12 team, and you're going to stick with them for the journey through to under-16s, they might not be the best team, but you need to get them ready to compete to start with, which is the process that you go through with your skills and what you stand for. And then by doing that, you build a really good foundation so that they're ready to win. So, for instance, the average age in training age, so Rugby World Cup, it's usually around 27. So with the English squad, we were 24. So you go, okay, look, we're a little bit off there. So how do you make those gains? And you make those gains ready to compete versus ready to win through your training. So that's where your training processes come through, and you have to challenge them, and you have to make training sometimes harder than games. For injured players, I got Mick Fanning there because when he was injured on the World Surfing Tour, he just did a lot of imagery. There was a part of his surfing that he wasn't quite fluid at, and he just looked at it and looked at it, and then mimicked those movements in his rehab. So there's no reason you can't do that in your rehab. Look, that's insanity. If we keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results, and then you're sheep walking. So, look, hopefully that sums up Skill Act from my end. Any questions there?
Yeah, just quickly from me, and then we've got one that's been sent in, but a couple of things that just stood out for me, obviously challenge point's massive, and that ability to kind of train ugly and be happy with it not looking well. But, with your manipulation, obviously, preparing that plan, you'd almost have to have those manipulation options written in your plan. Because if you just go to training and you've got, we're going to do this drill, but you don't have the manipulation points, then you probably wouldn't be ready to actually give the players what they needed in that moment, would you?
That's exactly right. So particularly in the younger part of your coaching, because as you become more experienced, and I'm going to talk about Eddie Jones here. So he's a master at just going, it's too easy. There's something not right, and he'll change things really quickly. Now, he's drawing on a bank of knowledge of, say, 25, 30 years of coaching. So you can do that because you build up your bank. And once again, I go back to that book, Deep Learning. You're building up your domain strength. But yeah, in the early stages, definitely write it down. I'll still write things on my hand of where I could go, because I'm going into a session. It might be the great unknown. We've got parameters, but what happens if, and then I go, right, these are some options. How can actually change the rules to make it harder and harder. Yep.
Yeah, cool. And with the attitude you're talking about around that talent, in your experience, if you increase the challenge point or manage that challenge point well, does that improve the attitude? So I would imagine for a lot of talented kids, they lose their attitudes off because they get bored or they're not challenged enough in the session. Do you find that?
Definitely. So I think that's a really big one to drive, to see how good kids can be, to see how good players can be. And by doing that, it actually sees how good you can coach. So there's a challenge for everyone there. The one thing I would say with the challenge point is at the end of the week, your last session, the last thing you do, you probably want to instill them with confidence. So that's where you might have a drill or a skill, and you might change it a bit, but there's a budgeted win. So you're playing a little bit of mind games there where they go, geez, we're feeling sharp, we're flying. So that's once again, that's the art of coaching.
Awesome. And the last one, this is from a guy called Phil Peake, who's at Lane Cove Junior Rugby. He's asked, what's the best way to teach a strong kicking attack when you don't have a lot of players that are good at kicking? So I would assume from what you've said is trying to create it into a game where they can kind of get some enjoyment and learn intrinsically.
Yeah, definitely. So the first piece of the puzzle there, Phil, is you've got to teach them how to kick. So, there might be the basic, you might start with just kick to kick just so they can feel their foot. But I spend very limited time on this. And then once they get good at kick to kick, I then advance it with tennis balls, because a tennis ball's hard to kick. But if you have a good ball drop and you've got a hard foot, the ball will go exactly where you want it to go. And if you can kick a tennis ball, you can kick a footy. So that's a take home for the kids. That's a challenge. So you might go, look, 5 meters away, you got to hit the width of a goalpost. 5 meters away, you got to hit it 3 times in a row. Who can do it? So that's a good takeaway. I was actually going to say kick something in the hallway, but then I'd get in trouble there. And then you implement it into your games in your training session. So, for instance, the old offside touch in grids, where you see how many passes you can get. Why not do it with kicking? If you kick off your right foot, then you have to kick off your left foot. Once again, there's no consequence because it's a game. Kids are having fun. We do it at international level. Some guys are horrible at it, absolutely horrible. But they're getting that practice and they're getting those movements of being able to take a defender to one side to then kick to another, or manipulate a shoulder to kick to get that space. So that's how I'd build it up there, Mummy.
Awesome. Well, mate, Thanks very much for your time. I know you've got plenty on your plate getting the Wallabies ready this year, but
Well, hopefully, mate. Hopefully.
yeah, I'm sure we'll get something. So, but these sessions have been really well received, and there's a lot of frustrated coaches at home who are just getting ready for the season and then missed out. So, we really appreciate your time and other coaches' times and the learnings you're able to give people. So, thanks, mate.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Everyone, stay safe. Cheers.
Great. Bye.